So I have a student who's interested in studying interior design in college, so I'm giving her a very specific assignment. I'm going to take an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock, and I'm going to measure halfway up, so that would be 4.25 inches on each side, and then I'm connecting that line. And then I'm going to measure halfway across. So if it's an 11 inches, that's 5.5 inches on each side. And then I'm going to connect that line. Notice how I'm measuring both at the top and the bottom. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to score the lines. And when I score the lines, I don't want to damage the table, so I'm putting a piece of poster board underneath the paper. It could be a piece of poster board, it could be a piece of cardboard, just something so that when I score it with the scissors, it doesn't cut into the table. So you just put the ruler against the line and you use the open blade of the scissors, and it'll cut the paper halfway through, so it makes a very nice clean fold. So I'm going to do that on the other side too. And then I'm going to fold it nicely, and then I'm going to cut from the edge up to the middle line. And that makes a little room because my student is into interior design. She's going to be designing a series of these little rooms. So I want to cut off the extra. I just have to line the ruler up and continue that line all the way up and cut that off. Now, if you want to cut nice and straight, a good idea is to score the line first against the ruler, and then when you cut it, it will cut very easily right on that crease. It's a trick for making good, clean, straight cuts. So now that I have my little room, I'm going to think about how I'm going to design the floors, the windows, and the doors. So what I'm doing is I'm making a diagonal line from corner to corner, and I'm ticking off every ½ inch. I'm going to make a wooden slat floor, and I want to make the slats nice and even. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the ruler as a straight edge, but I'm also lining the end of the ruler up with the end of the paper, and that's a good way to make sure that the lines are not crooked. So each time you draw a line, you got to line the end of the ruler up with the edge of the paper, so that the lines are parallel to each other. You're using the straight edge of the ruler, but you're also using the end of the ruler because it's at a 90-degree angle to the edge of the ruler. It'll ensure that all your lines are parallel. Just eyeball it at the bottom and make sure that the plastic end of the ruler is lined up nicely with the end of the paper. Now, this is not an accurate architectural model. It's more decorative, so we don't have to go crazy in terms of the measuring. It's just that it looks good. So I'm erasing the diagonal line now. And now I'm going to draw in the wooden floor slats. Now, if you've ever looked at a hardwood floor, the slats don't line up with each other. They line up, every other row of slats lines up with each other, almost like the way you draw a brick wall. So once you've done the first 2 courses of slats, you can extrapolate where they're going to go and fill in every other line going up. You see it's staggered. If you want to get fancy, you can put the wood grain in and really have fun with it. I'm just doing a quick sketch as an example. I'm hoping that my students will color and finish their work and make something more elaborate. I'm just making a quick sample right now. So now I'm going to make the doors and the windows. So I've decided I'm going to make the doors about 2 inches tall. I'd like you to follow the same measurements that I did, because otherwise you're going to make a house that your little people can't fit in. You're trying to make a little scale model of a house, you've got to make sure that it's got doors and windows that your little people can fit inside or look through. And that's not possible to do if you're not being mindful of the measurements. So we're going to go with that 2-inch for the door. And when you make the window, you're also going to make it around the same eye level. You want to make it so that the same person who can walk through the door would also be able to peek through the window. So you got to sort of line things up. So I've decided I'm going to make sort of a fantasy house, almost like a fairy house that you might find in the woods, making something kind of imaginative and whimsical. And that's really what I want you to do. I want you to play around with different designs based on what you're interested in, based on what you think looks interesting to you. Look through magazines, look on the internet, see what appeals to you and draw that. So I've always been interested in science fiction and fantasy, and I'll draw things that have a fairy tale quality. Now, to cut out holes, you actually just pinch the paper, make a little cut in the middle where the pinch is, and then cut around as I just did along the lines, turning the paper as you go. You don't want to just poke the scissors through because it could rip the paper, but if you give a little pinch and you make a hole using the scissors, it gives you the flexibility to cut inside. So I'm just playing around with the door. I can't make any furniture in this little 3D room because unless I want to cut and fold and construct furniture, but I'm not going to do that for this assignment. So I'm just creating my little fantasy room. I'm going to sort of skip forward a little bit. So you see I've added a window. And I've tried to make sure that the person who could look through the window could also peek through the door. I'm doing that little pinch to create the hole. And I'm turning the paper so that I can cut out more precisely. And now I need to make another window. So I'm going to draw some lines across where the bottom and the top of the window are, so that when I make the window on the next wall, I'm going to be able to line it up. So if I try just hand drawing it, it might not line up. So I immediately realize that, and I'm going to use my ruler. I line the ruler up with the end of the paper, and I draw a line across at the top of the window, a line across at the top of the door, and a line across at the bottom of the window. And that gives me some ballpark measurements so that I can make sure everything lines up along the whole house. Again, we're not making a complex architectural model. We're just making an imaginary fantasy room for fun. But I want to make sure that it fits some sort of a logic that if a little person were to stumble upon this room, they'd be able to walk through the door and look out the window. So I'm going to just skip ahead a little bit. As you can see, I've added a few more fun details, and now I'm going to grab a piece of tape. I'm going to put a loop of tape on the underneath the floor, and I'm going to assemble my little house. And once I've assembled my little room, I'm going to use it as a reference to draw an imaginary room. Now I'm looking down at my little room, and therefore what I'm drawing is called a bird's eye view. A bird's eye view means that everything in the room, the table, the chairs, the walls, I am looking down on as if I'm a bird flying over the room. So as everything gets farther away from me, like the corner of the room is the part of the room that's farthest away from me, it's going to get higher on the page because I'm looking down at it. So the far side of the windows is higher than the near side. The far side of the door is higher than the near side. Everything angles up away from me. And I cannot see the top inside of the door because I'm looking down at it. But I can see the bottom inside of the window because I'm looking down at it. So you sort of have to add in the details. And remember, we're doing fantasy architecture, so we're just using our original drawing as our original little construction as a reference. Now we get to add furniture and other details. So I've decided that the first thing that I'm going to add is going to be a table. And again, I'm looking down at the table, and therefore the table is going to go up as it gets farther away from me. So that means that the top of the table, the part of the table that's I'm looking down on, is going to look like a rectangle going away in space. And I've got to make sure that it's, let's see, the sides of the table will be pretty much parallel to the side wall that's going away from me, and the front and back end of the table will be pretty much parallel to the back wall that's going across. So again, I'm not using exact perspective, I'm just sort of eyeballing it. The legs will be vertical up and down, just like the sides of the wall, the edges of the walls going up and down. So I'm going to make the 4 legs of the table. And now if I were to make a bowl on the table, it would not be a circle, it would be an ellipse because it's in perspective. And you would look down on the bowl and see directly into it. So right on the table, I'm going to make an ellipse, and I'm going to start to make some round shapes to go inside that bowl, like it's a fruit bowl. So I can see down into the bowl. I'm looking at the bowl from above, like I'm Spider-Man suspended from the ceiling looking down on the scene. So when I make a little pitcher or a little vase, I'm going to be making it like I can see down into it. Again, the top of it will be an ellipse. And this is a good opportunity to use overlapping to make the pitcher a little bit hidden behind the bowl and to make sure it hides part of the table. That will give your picture a nice sense of depth. And now when I make the chair, the sides of the chair are going to be vertical straight up and down, but the top edge and the bottom edge of the chair are going to be parallel to the sides of the table. The legs will be vertical, but the leg nearer me will come lower on the page, and the leg farther away from me will be higher on the page because it's going away from me. As things get farther away, they get a little bit higher on the page as they progress towards the horizon line. So again, you're looking at this from what's called a bird's eye view. You're looking down on it. And again, it's a good idea to use overlapping to make sure that the part of the chair overlaps part of the bowl, and that'll give your picture a nice sense of three-dimensional depth. So now I'm going to think about how people will fit into the scene. And again, I have a few things in the picture that give me an idea of the scale, how big the people are supposed to be. See, I'm adding a few shadows. Trying to figure out where the light will be coming from. If it's streaming through the door or the window, then the side of the different objects that's nearest me would be in shadow. And the left-hand side towards the doors and windows would be lit up. Now, when I think about people, I know how big the chair is. I know how big the table is. I know how big the doors and windows are. So let me start at the door, and I'll draw a child looking in the door. And I'm thinking their legs might not come all the way down to the edge of the door because they're just outside. Maybe there's a stair or something upstairs, outside. I can make another child peeking in the window, and then I can make an older person a little taller than the child. But they still have to be small enough to fit in that door, otherwise the door is not a human scale. and I'm going to make another person standing in the room, and I've got to make them a little taller than the chair so that when they sit down, they'll be able to see over the table. So again, I'm thinking about what size the person needs to be. It's always a good idea that the leg that's nearest me will be lower, the leg that's farthest away from me will be a little higher. And it's always a good idea to think of people in terms of spheres and cylinders and rectangular solids instead of circles and squares, because that'll give them a sense of volume and existing within the imaginary space. I'm just going to skip ahead and continue to add little details. I'm sort of making the story up as I go along, but the idea is that you're going to create a series of imaginary rooms with imaginary doors, imaginary windows. Look up on the internet different door shapes and window shapes, different styles. And when you go to draw your pictures, you're going to use your little three-dimensional model as kind of a jumping off point. If you wanted to get really fancy, you could take paper or cardstock and try and fold some tables and chairs and little furniture out of cardboard or cardstock and put them into your little imaginary three-dimensional rooms. Or you could just imagine where they would be and just draw them. So the idea is that you're going to create a series of different designs as you start to think about the style of architecture and interior design that you're interested in. Think about colors, think about patterns, think about, what sorts of things you like to imagine. Imagine that this is your own fantasy dollhouse and you can decorate it any way you want. And then we'll talk later about how to add color to it and play around with it a little more. So that this will be a good start for your interior design career.